Good afternoon. So last time we're looking at bone development, condition known as osteogenesis, which is later followed by calcification. You can also call it ossification. So osteogenesis or ossification, formation of bone. Now, before we pick it up from where we left it last time, I want us to know that bone development is of two types. So bones in the body develop, number one, from cartilage. Then bones in the body can also develop from membranes. Most of the bones in the body develop from cartilage. So such kind of development, we call it endochondral ossification or osteogenesis. Endo meaning within, chondro meaning cartilage. Then we have intramembranous. Intra again means in or inside. Membrane, inside the membrane. So regardless, all bones in the human body will develop either from cartilage or membrane. So there are only few bones in the body that develop from membrane. Example given is the skull. The bones that make up the top part of the head. Those develop from membrane. We also have the collarbone. Yeah, the clavicle, or what you can call the collarbone. That is a bone that develops from membrane as well. Whether it is coming from membrane or cartilage, it is still bone, and the strength, the structural support is the same. So the one I'll discuss here today, and which we discussed earlier on last time, is endochondral. I beg your pardon. Endochondral, meaning that it's developing from cartilage. So last time we started this process. Here is a cartilage model. That's why it's appearing whitish here. To be specific, this is hyaline cartilage. You remember hyaline cartilage appears whitish, bluish. It's actually blue in color. Okay, but to the naked eye, it will appear white, but it's actually bluish. So in the fetus, you don't find bones. You find cartilage. To be specific, hyaline cartilage. So the skeleton of a fetus is cartilage. It's not bone. So around 8 weeks. So that's 8 weeks. That's roughly 2 months from the time that a woman gets pregnant. This cartilage is already there. It's formed by 8 weeks, which is 2 months of pregnancy, still in the first trimester. Around 8 weeks, the cartilage, the skeleton of a fetus is now being transformed into bone. So it starts at 8 weeks. So what happens to this cartilage for it to be transformed into bone? Okay. I explained to say the collar appears at 8 weeks. So we call this as bone collar. Now, this collar is tough connective tissue or dense connective tissue. So it seals off around the diaphysis. This is diaphysis, the middle part of the long bone. That is epiphysis. This is epiphysis. You can call this also as shaft. So this one has no collar, but this one has a collar, which is tough or dense connective tissue. So what happens is blood supply is cut off. Blood, nutrients, gases is cut off when the collar develops. So remember, cartilage is not vascularized. Cartilage doesn't have blood vessels in it. So it depends on diffusion. Cells of cartilage, for them to survive, respire, and metabolize, they depend on diffusion of nutrients and gases from nearby blood vessels. So you can't see blood vessels inside the cartilage. It's not possible. That's why healing, when cartilage is damaged or injured, takes time. And that's why these athletes, sportsmen, usually retire when they have injuries in the joints, injuries in the tendons, because those structures I've mentioned, they don't have blood supply. So healing takes years, and this person cannot perform. In the club can't sign them anymore. So they easily retire after that. Footballers, runners, and so on and so forth. So the collar, once it develops, I was saying around 8 weeks, blood, oxygen and nutrients supply is cut off. Now, the main cells of cartilage, we call them chondroblasts and chondrocytes. So the immature ones, we call them chondroblasts. The mature ones, we call them chondrocytes. Same cell, except one is mature, one is immature. The immature ones, the chondroblasts, build cartilage, what we are seeing here, whereas the mature ones maintain the cartilage to remain in this shape. Now, when blood and oxygen and all those nutrients are cut off by the collar, as you can see, the collar is thickening there. Collar is thickening, thickening, thickening. What happens is cells inside the cartilage begin to die because they can't receive nutrients, neither can they take away their waste products. So cells undergo necrosis. They die. What happens next is blood vessels penetrate the collar and enter the cartilage. Okay. This is known as angiogenesis, development of blood vessels in a tissue. You can see that. So cartilage is now becoming vascularized, which is not a normal finding. We don't expect cartilage to have blood vessels in it, but what we want to have at the end of the day is bone. So blood vessels enter or penetrate the collar and reach the central part here, where the chondroblasts were dying. So what do you expect if blood vessels have entered the tissue? So blood vessels will bring gases, nutrients, minerals, and so on. At the same time, these blood vessels will take away the waste. So these cartilage do not die completely the moment these blood vessels come in, because help is now available. Now, as the blood vessels penetrate the cartilage and they are bringing blood there, they will bring new type of cells. We call now these cells as osteoblasts. Okay. Previously, we had chondroblasts, which helped us to make this cartilage. Now, blood vessels are bringing osteoblasts. So osteo is bone. So these cells will build the bone. So osteoblasts will be deposited there. So the first part here, the middle part, that part where chondroblasts died and the blood vessels entered and brought new cell, is what we call the primary ossification center. Primary ossification center, because that is where the osteoblasts will be. So they will be deposited here, osteoblasts, bone-forming cells, to replace cartilage-forming cells. So that occurs at 8 weeks of gestation, second month of life of a fetus. Okay. So all primary ossification centers in all bones of the human body appear at 8 weeks. So in short, the skeleton of a fetus at 8 weeks is now being transformed into a bony skeleton, from cartilage skeleton to bone skeleton. That process occurs at 9 weeks of gestation. And the first point of a cartilage that will be converted from cartilage to bone is what we call the primary ossification center. It is the same site where the new type of cells have been deposited. Those cells we are calling osteoblasts. So this blood vessel never leaves the bone until we die, the one that comes in there. So all long bones, if you examine them, you're going to find a small perforation, a small hole. Okay, that is a blood vessel. Okay, so we call that small perforation as a nutrient foramen. All long bones in the human body, talk of the femur, the fibula, the humerus, the ulna, radius, all of them have what we call a nutrient foramen. Only one. And this nutrient foramen is found in the diaphysis, or the shaft of the long bone. There. It brings blood vessels together with osteoblasts. So once osteoblasts are here now, they begin to multiply. Once they multiply, osteoblasts have one goal. That is to produce a substance known as osteoid. We discussed what osteoid is. Osteoid is the organic matter secreted by osteoblasts. Okay. We talked about composition of bone, where bone has water as well as, let me take you back to that. Yeah. So we have 25% water and the organic matter. Now, organic matter is composed of cells plus osteoids. So those cells, the osteoblasts, when they multiply in the shaft there, they begin to secrete this matter. This matter is composed of organic matter, mainly carbon, right? Now, that begins to form a bond. So because it will harden at some point when osteoid mixes with calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate, then the osteoid hardens, and then we have now these strong bonds that we have in the body. Because initially bonds are soft because they are cartilage. Once osteoid is secreted and then mixes with calcium phosphate and carbonate, it hardens to become strong bone. So there, you can see now that this structure, cartilage, is now becoming bone. So, development of the bone begins from the central part here and then spreads out, going up, going down, sideways, like that. So, these distal parts, that part there, this part here, and this part there, the parts that are away from the central, usually remain cartilage, right? So, the middle part will be bone, then the distal parts will be still cartilage. So by the time the baby is being born, it's not fully a skeleton made of bone, no. It's only the middle part, this part here, that will have bone. The remainder will have cartilage until this baby begins now to, get calcium from the mother's milk and other nutrients. Then that calcium is continuously deposited, bones are growing. Here, it keeps on growing until the entire bone is now covered with bone instead of remaining cartilage at the far ends like that. And that's why you don't expect a newborn baby to stand. Those are cartilage. They can't stand on cartilage. You can only stand on bone. So that's why nature knows. The baby has to wait. You just have to sit, sometimes even just sleep. They can't stand on cartilage. It's only bone that we can stand on. Okay, so that's what happens. So this type of bone development is what we call endochondral. Chondro meaning cartilage. It was previously cartilage. It is now being transformed into bone. So once ossification completes, the only part of the bone that remains cartilage is that part there where movement occurs. So there will be another bone here, and then movement will be occurring. Okay. So we call that as articular cartilage. So this is articular cartilage. That is articular cartilage. It was part of this, but now the remainder of the bone has been ossified. So the time that the baby is being born, this part is bone. The remaining part is cartilage. Now, once the baby is born, okay, we see another ossification center appearing. So primary ossification center was saying they appear at 8 weeks. Then secondary ossification centers appear after birth. The moment the child is born, we see more centers appear in each epiphysis. That is epiphysis. This is epiphysis. The middle part we said is diaphysis. So these structures we are seeing are secondary ossification centers, which appear after birth, all of them in the human body. All secondary ossification centers appear after birth. All primary ossification centers appear at 8 weeks of gestation. Now, that is primary ossification center. This is secondary. So this part will again start to be transformed into bone. This part will be transformed into bone from cartilage. Then there is also developing. So what happens now? Bone from the primary ossification center will meet with bone from secondary ossification center. Since there are two, there and there, they'll meet here from the primary and there from the primary. So the space that remains now, this one, where they meet, this one and this one, is what we call the epiphyseal plate. Okay, that is the epiphyseal plate. So this is diaphysis, this is epiphysis. Growth of the bone is occurring from the center going this side. Bone growth is occurring from the center going down. So here in the middle, separating diaphysis from epiphysis. This is diaphysis. This is epiphysis. This is epiphysis. That part there is the same as this one. So there will be bone there. There will be bone here, but here there is cartilage. So this is seen in young persons, individuals who are 25 years and below. This is bone, but in between these two bones is epiphyseal plate or growth plate. Okay, now, growth plate, since it is cartilage, you will see that it has the following layers. Okay, so I'll use the diagram to explain this one. So what we're going to look at is this part here, this thickness. So there is bone above, bone below. All right. This bone developed from primary ossification center. This bone developed from secondary ossification center. Then in between is cartilage that is yet to be filled with bone. So we call this layer, thin layer of cartilage as epiphyseal plate, which is seen here. Right. So if you hammer, if you apply force there, you can break this bone easily because above there is bone, below it is bone. But in the middle there is cartilage. So young persons usually develop fractures in this area. When you fall on your arm or on your shoulder, usually the bone splits or fractures at that level. Because this is cartilage, this is bone, this is bone. So it's easy to break from there. So let's look at the layers that form the epiphyseal plate. So there are 4 layers. Okay. So under a microscope, it will look like that. This is the layer we're looking at. So we'll start with the first layer. So the first layer is facing towards the epiphysis. Then the 4th layer will be closer to the diaphysis. So we're starting from above, going down like that. From above, going down. So first layer will be here. 2nd layer, 3rd layer, then finally 4th layer will be somewhere here. So let's look at it in greater details and in a modified and magnified, diagram. So this is diaphysis, this is epiphysis. So remember there will be 2 epiphyseal plates. Okay, there will be one here and another one there, or growth plates, because this is where elongation of bones take place. It will expand from there and here. So let's look at those layers. So layer number 1 is composed of cells that are resting. So we call it the resting zone. There, you can see these cells are very tiny in size because the cells are inactive. You don't expect cells that are inactive to be very big in size because they are doing nothing. So they shrink and they are scattered all over. They are not in any order. So it's called the resting zone. What is the importance of that? The importance of the resting zone is to attach the epiphyseal plate, this one, to the epiphysis. So it attaches this to that so that there's no separation. So these cells are resting. Remember, this is cartilage. So cells we're going to find here are chondroblasts and chondrocytes. But cells that will be here are osteoblasts and osteocytes. Even here, we're going to have osteoblasts and osteocytes. So we must make that distinction. So cells in the resting zone, like we're saying, function is to attach the epiphyseal plate to the epiphysis. Next layer now, you can see that these cells have a well-organized pattern. You see those columns packed with cells. So this is not one cell, but multiple cells, but this time they are organized. So we call that as a proliferative zone. So cells, first they were resting. Now in this state, these cells will enter that layer and begin to multiply in number. So one cell splits to give us 2 daughter cells, another one splits to give us 2 daughter cells. So they are forming a family. So you can see this is one family, another family, another family, another family, like that. So we call that as a proliferative zone. Now, this zone is important because its function enables us to repair and grow the epiphyseal plate. So this epiphyseal plate will expand in its size because more cells will multiply, and these cells will need to occupy space. And that way, you find that the bone becomes longer. Okay, initially, you see that the young person, the height will be shorter, but as years goes by, this small person is growing in height. Why? Because of what is happening here, especially in long bones. Bones in the legs, bones in the arms, bones in the spine, they undergo this process. So that's why the height will increase with growth because of what is happening there, right? So that is second layer. It enables repair as well as growth of this. When this layer grows, then the bone also grows in length. What about the third layer? Third layer is known as layer of hypertrophy. You can see that zone here. Now, if you compare this size and there, the cells in this stage look bigger, or they look swollen, if you like. So that's why the name is hypertrophy, layer of hypertrophy. So chondroblasts, all of these are chondroblasts. These. Chondroblasts, when they reach this third layer, they increase in size. Okay. Now that increase also expands the epiphyseal plate and also renders growth to the bone. So growth of the bone in terms of height or length is dependent on these cells expanding in their size. And therefore, this layer also expands and the bone will lengthen. Then finally, we have the calcified layer. So once the cells have grown in size, they enter the fourth layer. Now, this fourth layer, when the cells are big, they accumulate or they acquire calcium. So where is calcium coming from? Calcium is coming from blood. Okay. And that calcium in blood comes from the diet that we eat. Okay. Carpenter, bananas, these beverages that we take, water, and so on. There's calcium there. Okay. Milk, there's calcium. And that's why milk is important to a baby. Not only does it provide the nutrients for energy, but also for bones to become, strong. Together with vitamin C, very important for bone development. So when the cells grow big, next process is to acquire calcium. So that's why calcium is cardinal for bone development, and there's a high content of calcium in milk because bones will grow not only in size but also become stronger when they acquire calcium. So those are the 4 layers. So once this layer becomes, the cells become or accumulate calcium, the function of this layer now is to attach the epiphyseal or the growth plate, this layer, to the diaphysis. So first layer and the last layer are for attachment. Then third and fourth is to expand the growth plate or to make the bone grow longer. Okay. So those are the 4 layers: resting layer or zone, proliferative or mitotic layer, hypertrophy layer, and finally calcified layer. So up to the time that we reach 25 years of age, these cells disappear from the growth plate. So this area around 25, others is 24, others is maybe 26, those that delay. Around that age, this layer disappears in our skeleton, meaning at that stage you stop growing in height. So your height at that age remains your permanent height for life, because the part that enables the skeleton to grow longer disappears, right? Now, in children, especially those that are, I can say 5 years and below, because this is very wide. This is an important side, because you find that sometimes a child maybe has been vomiting, they had diarrhea and so on. Then you try to put a cannula in the blood vessels, in the veins. Then the veins have collapsed, we can't find them. The last resort for you to give fluid to this child is to inject a needle in the bone, specifically in this layer, and leave a cannula there. So fluid will be flooding here, and then fluid will diffuse into that area, into this area, until it finds the blood vessels that are inside there, and then enter into the general circulation. So this area is used also for cannulation, but it is a very controversial area, because if you cause damage to these cells, then you impair growth of that bone. In short, you are inhibiting someone's height, because you have damaged the cells in this layer, especially the cells in the proliferative and hypertrophic layer. So you use a, what is this? CT scan guided cannula, because you have to be looking under a computer as you inject the needle, and then you leave it there. Fluid will be flowing. So don't be surprised if you go to ICU and you find the cannula in the bone. It is a specific point in the bone where you're injecting that cannula. Of course, it requires specialized personnel to do that, but it is the last option. So at that stage, you judge what is more important, to let the baby die or to risk, to risk their height. So you put fluids there, like, because life is more important than those other things. Okay, so that's about the epiphyseal plate. Very cardinal, and you must know these layers and their functions. Okay, we talked about type of cells in the previous discussion, so that is your homework. What I would like to talk about is factors that influence growth, right? Growth of bones. So what are those things that we look at that will enable bones either to grow or not to grow? Number one is hereditary. So the skeleton that we all have is dependent on the genes that we have or acquire from our parents. So genes determine what we call the maximum height, all right? Yeah, so you've heard of individuals from South Sudan. I've forgotten that tribe. That tribe was the tallest human beings on earth. Similarly with, what do you call these? Red Indians from America. They produce one of the giants that we have. So for them, being tall like that is normal. They are very huge guys. It's not like they have growth hormone disorders. No, it's just that their genes determine that they'll grow like that. All right. Then as you come here in Africa and so on, you see a variation. Okay, variation of genes. So height, number one, is determined by genes. So meaning growth of the skeleton has to do with genes. Number two is nutrition. So in the nutrients, we're concerned with calcium, number one, phosphate, number two, and protein. Remember, protein, we call it as a bodybuilding food. So that is important. Apart from that, we also have vitamin C, vitamin A, and vitamin D. These vitamins are essential for us to get nutrients, especially calcium, from the digestive system. So absorption of calcium, when we drink milk, to absorb calcium, we need vitamin D, what is known as extrinsic factor. It is very important because to transport calcium from the small intestine into blood, we need vitamin D. Again, to transport calcium from blood vessels into bones, you need vitamin D. So in short, vitamin D is like it's like a vehicle that is used by calcium to reach its destination. Vitamin C, again, is essential for collagen. Remember, collagen synthesis is poor when you have little vitamin C in your body. And collagen is one of the main fibers we find in bones. So you find that this individual or this child, of course, they're getting adequate amount of milk. They also have adequate amount of vitamin D. But if they are lacking in vitamin C, these are babies that develop rickets because the type of bones they'll form will not be strong. So when they stand, the weight of the body causes the bones to curve outwards or inwards. There are two types of rickets anyway. Those that curve outwards and those that curve inwards. Both of them is because of weak bones. So that's factor number 2, nutrition. It must be balanced and adequate. So if you have a child that is growing, it's important that they get a lot of nutrients, calcium. They should drink a lot of milk, apart from the one that they're getting from the mother. In addition, let them have a lot of fruits, okay? Oranges, mangoes, and so on. Let the children eat those things. It's not for fun, even though they may eat like they are so fun. It's a body that demands that. That's why, kids eat a lot, because the body needs it. Next is hormones, right? Most importantly is growth hormone. Growth hormone, like the name suggests, is the hormone that enables us to grow physically. So if the body produces little amount of it, then the growth will be less. Again, too much of growth hormone, you have giants. Someone is 9 years, but they look like they are 35 or something like that. You've seen that when we're discussing the endocrine system, giantism versus dwarfism, hormones affecting that. In addition to that, we have sex hormones. The most importantly in females is estrogen, males is testosterone. So if you look at the male skeleton and female skeleton, it's easy to know because female skeleton is thin. The bones of a woman are thin as compared to bones of a man. Male bones are thick and they are roughened on their surface. Female bones are thin, small, and very smooth on the surface, like a child. Sometimes it's difficult. If you are given a bone of a child and the bone of a female, you may not know whether it is a female or a child because they have similar features as compared to male bones. So those that do forensic anatomy, for example, you can use bones to identify the gender of an individual, whether it is male or female. Lastly is exercise. Exercise are important for bones to grow. So you find individuals that are involved in strenuous activities from childhood, you find that they have a very well-built skeleton because you have to match with that kind of energy that they exert on a daily basis. So therefore, a child that is less active, usually they don't have strong skeleton because the skeleton is not put under stress. So it's important that this child is active anyway. Even to lift sometimes heavy stuff is normal. All right. Now, again, overloading becomes a problem because if a child is given heavy stuff to lift when they're still young, what happens is that the growth plate becomes shattered here. That layer we're talking about with 4 layers. If once it's damaged, then this child cannot grow tall. This has been seen or demonstrated in kids that usually jump from heights. As you are playing, you're jumping from trees, buildings, and so on. If you're not careful, and if they start early, they may actually stunt their growth because that jumping causes damage to those cells, and that may affect the growth of the skeleton. Otherwise, those are the factors that affect growth of bones. It's both ways, in a positive direction and in a negative direction. So moderate exercise is important. Okay, it's not abuse when parents were sending us to go and fetch firewood, water, and so on. That is to enable us to be stronger and also for the skeleton to grow. So end here for today. In the next discussion, we'll start looking at the actual bones now. We'll start from the head, going down towards the legs. So I'll send the notes in advance, you can go through. So for any questions, again, you can ask questions in class, or you can reach out to me.